Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another frequently asked question from our readers, and the question last week was, what's the average length of stay in intensive care after severe head or brain injury or brain trauma, also known as TBI? You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our readers, and the question this week is, we decided to withdraw treatment on my mother a few years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. It was horrible to watch. Did we do the right thing? This question from Marion is from a one-on-one email counseling and consulting session with me. Marion writes, Hi Patrick, I have a question that has been haunting me for the last 4 years. My mother was placed on a ventilator, and we were told that she was probably never going to recover. She, over the 3 years, had many health issues, had already coded once earlier that particular day, and had been bedridden for about 3 years. We decided to remove her from life support and let her pass on. Here's the issue. I thought that the doctor had told us that she would be sedated and she hadn't been awake for a few days, and I didn't question it at the time. However, after much back and forth asking the nurses when were they going to do this so we can coordinate our family, after about a day they came in and took the tube from her mouth and she began to gasp for air. I felt and still feel like we were killing her and that I should have had them put it back in. She gasped for air for about half an hour, but it seemed like a lifetime to me. I can never get that picture from my mind, and I need to know that was supposed to happen. I have never heard anyone else say that it happened that way when their loved one passed on. What should we have done differently? I cannot seem to let this go until I know what I or we did. Any help or information that you may be able to provide would be extremely helpful in me getting some type of closure. Thank you in advance from Marion. So, here is my answer. Hi Marion, thank you for your question and thank you for using my one-on-one email counseling and consulting services. I can understand why this question and situation has been haunting you. It's not pleasant to witness the death of your mother in the circumstances that you have described. It's a situation that occurs quite frequently in intensive care when it comes to end of life and or withdrawal of treatment situations, especially if it's not well planned and not well explained. It sounds to me like the situation hasn't been well planned at all and it hasn't been well explained to you and your family. It's really important that an end-of-life situation in intensive care is well planned in the first place, so that the doctors, the nurses, the patient and the family can approach this situation with confidence. Whenever there is an end-of-life situation that can be planned in intensive care, all parties involved should be in agreement that this is the best option for a critically ill patient. Now, it sounds to me like you and your family thought that having your mother pass away was the right thing to do, because she was bedridden for a long time and she had many medical issues. You were also told that your mother wouldn't recover, and I would be curious to know on what grounds. From what you are describing, you have also thought that seeing your mother suffer on a ventilator in intensive care was just too much to endure for her, and you felt like withdrawing treatment and removing the breathing tube and letting her pass on was the right thing to do. And of course, the intensive care team telling you that your mother most likely won't recover set you up in the direction where there was a point of no return. Now, here's what you need to know about end-of-life situations in intensive care. First of all, you need to know if you are dealing with a real or a perceived end-of-life situation. What's the difference, you may wonder? I have explained this in another article and video where I explain the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You can check it out by clicking on the link below this video in the written version of this blog. After you and your family have come to the conclusion that you are dealing with a real and not a perceived end-of-life situation, you and your family could have confidently said that you think it's quote-unquote in the best interest for your mother to have the breathing tube removed and let her pass on. It sounds to me like you have done that, and then you were very surprised in the approach where you witnessed an end-of-life situation where you felt like your mother was unduly suffering in the last few minutes of her life. If you have followed my blog or the Your Questions Answered episodes for any length of time, you would have heard me mentioning over and over again that whenever it comes to your critically ill loved one inevitably approaching their end of life in intensive care, that you want to have an end of life situation on your terms. Now, you may also want to check out another resource that I put in the link below this video. That's important for anyone who's dealing with a perceived end-of-life situation in intensive care. And you may want to check out an ebook that I wrote about the 5 things you need to know if the medical team in intensive care wants to limit or withdraw treatment in intensive care for your critically ill loved one. So check out this ebook. I put a link below this video in the written version of this blog. Now, in nearly 20 years intensive care experience in 3 different countries where I literally worked with thousands of critically ill patients and their families, and where I also worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years, as well as now in my one-on-one counseling and consulting practice at intensivecarehotline.com, I have seen way too many patients and their families getting into end-of-life situations that turn out to be horrible, or that weren't real end-of-life situations in the first place. Let me explain. The reality in intensive care is that unfortunately around 6 to 10% of patients are not surviving their stay in intensive care. Most of the time, when it comes to end-of-life situations in intensive care, it is poorly planned, poorly communicated, and also poorly executed for a number of reasons that I will come to in a moment. Whenever the decision is being made, and hopefully that is a mutually agreeable decision, that it's really quote-unquote in the best interest of a critically ill patient in intensive care to have them approach their end of life, the intensive care team often wants to rush things, because as I explained in numerous of my blogs, articles, videos and ebooks, the intensive care team's hidden agenda is never your agenda. Your agenda is to have an end-of-life situation on your terms, where you can get your family together and make sure that you have made an informed decision, that you have peace of mind, control, power and influence before, during and after an end-of-life situation. It sounds to me like you've had very little of it, and it sounds to me like the process was not well explained to you and it was extremely poorly executed. I'm not sure whether at the time you and your family had all of their needs met. Again, many families, when faced with an end-of-life situation, want to have their religious, spiritual, cultural and other needs met when they come towards the end of a life of one of their loved ones. This might also include to have a loved one pass away at home instead of intensive care, and I come to that in a moment. You haven't mentioned that, so I'm not sure if your needs had been met at any stage in this end-of-life situation. Once you are comfortable with what's happening on a religious, spiritual, cultural and on any other levels that are important to you and your family, then the intensive care team should have started to prepare your mother for the end-of-life situation. They could and they should have done this by making sure she's very comfortable so that she can pass away peacefully. Now, the situation you have witnessed, Marianne, is an awful situation, because I have witnessed similar end-of-life situations in intensive care to the one you've described, and it's not very pleasant to watch at all. The things the intensive care team should have prevented your mother from suffering and from struggling approaching her end of life was that they should have given her adequate sedation and pain relief. The drugs of choice for adequate pain relief and sedation in an end-of-life situation are midazolam, also known as Versed, for sedation, and either fentanyl or morphine for pain relief. If your mother would have been given sufficient amounts of either midazolam for sedation and morphine or fentanyl, she should have been able to pass away peacefully without gasping for air. You may also want to check out a related article and video. How long does it take to die after removing the breathing machine or life support? So check out this article and video. Again, I put a link in the written version of this blog below the video. Unfortunately, most intensive care units are pretty poor when it comes to communicating and also then going through end-of-life situations, because they are often rushed and hastened, and it also takes experienced and very compassionate staff to make sure they are carrying the end-of-life situation out with diligence, skill, empathy and compassion to make sure that patients don't suffer in the final moments of their life. By the same token, it's also important that families of critically ill patients feel that they know what's about to happen and how it can be ensured that their loved one isn't suffering during their final moments. To me, it sounds like neither was the case during your mother's passing. And again, I have said it over and over again. You want to have an end-of-life situation on your terms and not on the intensive care team's terms. So what do I exactly mean by that? I have said it over and over again that many families in intensive care, when faced with a real and inevitable end-of-life situation, are leaving intensive care bitter and resentful, which is what happened in your case. You are, to a degree, bitter and resentful towards the situation because it still haunts you after 4 years. And that's only fair enough. You didn't know what to look through blindly. You don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. Now, it's of course never too late to shine the light on what could have happened, and the reality is that you could have also looked at options such as intensive care at home to let your mother pass away at home. Again, if you look at the statistics and the surveys, they all suggest that 75% of the population in Western countries want to die at home if given the option, and yet less than 15% actually do die at home in Western countries. Therefore, intensive care at home is filling a need for patients and their families. Last but not least, it doesn't surprise me that you've had such a bad experience with the passing of your mother, and it doesn't surprise me that the end-of-life situation of your mother was handled the way you have experienced it. Again, I have seen many similar situations during my clinical practice because end-of-life situations are handled very poorly in most intensive care units. Always keep in mind that even in end-of-life situations in intensive care, the number one priority for an intensive care unit is to get what they want and not what you want. So you may wonder, what do they want? Well, they want their beds, their staff and other resources including money working efficiently for them. And therefore, the sooner your mother had gone, the sooner they could have used those resources to move on to the next patient. Again, you just don't know what you don't know, and you certainly have no idea what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care, and the way the intensive care team is managing their hidden agenda tends to be so powerful that you have no idea what's really happening in intensive care unless you start reading my blog. Fair enough, you and your family have made the decision at the time you've made this decision, again in good faith, only to become very disappointed. But always keep in mind that the intensive care team's agenda is not your agenda, and that their main driver is money, bed management, politics, hierarchies, staff and other resource management, and they are most of the time not interested in you and your family making an informed decision, have peace of mind, control, power and influence. Many, if not most, end-of-life situations in intensive care are poorly planned, they are poorly executed, and they are also often rushed and hastened, which is what I believe unfortunately happened in your mother's situation. It also sounds to me like you and your mother were dealing with inexperienced staff that had little empathy. Otherwise, they would have planned and communicated better. I really hope this helps Marion and you now can get some closure on this. I'm wishing you and your family all the best. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? Make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care, and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Also, check out our ebook section, where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one counseling and consulting me via Skype, over the phone or via email by clicking on the Products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.